Welcome back. For our next session, I'm joined by Linda Thielová from OneTrust. And she's giving a presentation on a particular important topic, which I'll tell you in a second, but I would like to introduce her first to you. Linda serves as a privacy counsel at OneTrust, and in her role, she provides guidance on GDPR, e-privacy, and global privacy-related obligations to support product innovation and assist on compliance effort. Compliance is getting more and more important these days for a wide spectrum of organizations from both private and public sectors. So quite a broad portfolio of expertise we have here with Linda today. She will now give us insights on a very hands-on GDPR compliance issue, data breaches. So welcome, Linda. I'm so happy that you could join us today, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, and I'll give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's really nice to be here with you, although virtually, but I'm really glad to be here and to discuss the subject. So today's session, as you've already mentioned, is going to be focusing on the data breaches, but also on the ethics breaches and sort of making sure that we're prepared for either one of them, both of them, all of them. And as mentioned, my name is Linda. I'm a privacy counsel with OneTrust. Just to give you a quick overview of who we are in terms of who OneTrust are, we are actually a privacy software company, but we're also focusing on security and trust. So we're helping our customers who are businesses or small ventures to make sure that they're compliant with all the amazing laws that we're seeing emerge these days, like the GDPR, California CCPA, the LGBT in Brazil, but also we're helping you figure out things like your ISO certification and compliance with that, and to help you sort of manage your compliance programs overall. We have quite a few customers now, actually over 5,000, and they're really big or small companies all across the globe, which is really nice. We have heaps of employees, actually over 1,500, I believe. And they're kind of stacked up also heavily in research and development, making sure that our software offering is really robust and that the tools that you're using are first class. Finally, one thing to highlight here is that we're really globally present. So our offices are across the whole world. We have offices in Munich. We have offices in London. Hello from London, by the way. And we have also offices in New York, Atlanta, Melbourne, all over. So as I mentioned, we're focusing on privacy software, but we're also looking at security and compliance. And in terms of the privacy software specifically, the Forrester Wave, which is an independent in-depth evaluation of companies in terms of their product offering, has named us a leader because we're hopefully able to combine both the strategy and also really good, great in execution. So feel free to check out Forrester Wave for a market comparison if you're interested in the privacy software in general. Now, diving back into the theme of our session, which is the data breaches and ethics breaches. One thing I would like to clarify first is, where is the difference? What are we actually talking about when we're discussing ethics? Because I find, at least in my personal experience, when we're discussing data breaches, people sort of tend to have a general idea what we're discussing here. The fact that someone steals your laptop, the fact that you're sharing the data with someone you're not supposed to. But when you're talking about ethics breaches, you tend to get quite a few blank stares, unfortunately. So it's probably good to nail down the basics in terms of what is ethics. So ethics as such, we could spend a lot of time defining in a lot of terms, but essentially it really boils down to doing the right thing, even when people are not really watching you doing it, even when it might actually end up costing you more money. And it seems like, I would say almost intuitively, we do have a good grasp on the personal level of what would be unethical in our own conduct. But how does this translate into ethics in our organizations and in our day-to-day business? Well, to say it really shortly, it can be quite challenging. So here is a picture that is from my favorite TV show, Better Off Ted, and I think that really describes quite well some of the challenges that the companies can end up with when they're kind of thinking about ethics and trying to promote it. So just to highlight really quickly some of the key issues that the companies struggle with when they're discussing ethics breaches as such. First things, to be actually able to recognize the right thing. What does that actually mean for us in our business in terms of what we're actually doing day to day? How does it translate into what our HR person is doing versus what our salesperson is doing versus what our manufacturing facilities are doing? That thing alone can be quite challenging. Secondly, how do we make sure that the management is paying attention to it? How do we make sure that the top levels of the company are actually allocating enough funds to make ethics something that's present across the whole company? Obviously, it's not just about warm and fuzzy feelings for your boards of directors. It's also about making sure that they understand that ethics breaches actually impact them also on the economic side of things. So the fact that it can mean that your share value drops rapidly, that you lose your customers, and that your contracts are broken, and that your company reputation sinks. Those are the things which normally, beyond the good kind of feeling, are actually resonating really well with the board of directors, and that actually make ethics the forefront of discussions we're seeing in terms of compliance, privacy, and security spheres these days. And finally, more importantly, and that's kind of what this picture also reflects, how do you make sure that we avoid what is called the ethics washing, which I think is really slippery slope to get into, because it means that ethics should not just be treated by our companies as a PR stunt, as a sort of stamp that we put on our website and say, hey guys, we're ethical, we're all good. But really to sort of talk the talk, walk the walk, make sure that everyone within the company, not just our PR people who put this on the website, is aware of what ethics means and why it's important and how does it reflect in their day-to-day job. Actually, there have been research studies done that say that even though we're all aware of the things we should be doing in terms of ethics, the fact that we put it on our day-to-day checklist and that we're sort of forced to consider it in our day-to-day tasks, it actually means that we adhere to our codes of conduct or to our ethical manifestos way more, rather than just being sort of left alone and considered that we're always, of course, going to be acting ethically. So avoiding ethics washing and making ethics part of your, I would say, company structure and DNA is actually quite paramount to succeeding in preventing ethics incidents and breaches. But let's take a look at the bigger conversation as well, because in terms of defining what actually ethics or doing the right thing means for your company, we can't unfortunately select some one-size-fits-all type of solution there. So even though it's really painful, and I hate to say it, you're going to actually have to get multiple people into the room, perhaps virtual room these days, and make sure that they understand how doing the right thing reflects to what their particular team or department is working on. So that's where it becomes kind of, I would say, more granulated and can become really complex, because ethics, by definition, is going beyond the laws. So a really good example would be that you can still comply with the laws to the T, 100% compliance, and you can still commit an ethics breach. That's where we need to step up and figure out, okay, what are those things that we're missing here? What are those areas of concern which are specifically relevant to our business that we need to be looking at? And depending on where your organization finds itself, for instance, are you operating in healthcare? Are you operating in specific jurisdictions that are requiring certain things? Or are you, let's say, in the manufacturing process where people would be expecting a certain environmental statements from you? Or maybe you are committing to certain things outside of what is legally required. All of those things will be feeding into what is your understanding of ethics. And it's really good to capture that based on all of those various themes, because again, ethics in workplace for HR would be super relevant, but they might not necessarily be quite as concerned with, let's say, the healthcare elements of ethics in your drug manufacturing process. So that's why it's really important to have everyone together, figure out what it means for them, put it down on a paper, make sure that this is something that everyone's comfortable with, and move on from that, because this is going to be what you assess your day-to-day against and figure out, okay, is this something in breach of what we've just written down? Is this something that we shouldn't be really doing under our statement here, under our code of ethics? And if so, that's where you end up with ethics breach, essentially. And again, it's really, I know it sounds very lofty and almost too theoretical, but it actually turns out that a lot of people end up following these ethics codes of conduct, especially when they're quite clearly communicated to them and when they're made part of their day-to-day concerns. So really, when you frame the company culture in a way where it's open to these kinds of concerns, you'll see the people sort of jumping on the wagon as well. Now, moving back to actually recognizing the different types of ethics and other types of breaches, it's really, really complex. I'm not going to lie to you. Very often, we're going to end up in a situation where these are really closely intertwined. So a few of them, I would like to really highlight the few categories that we should be tackling sort of in parallel are specifically security breaches, which really boil down to compromise of the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of your data. The data could be anything really. It doesn't necessarily need to involve personal data, but it might often end up involving personal data, which is where we also end up, you know it, discussing the privacy breaches as well. So this is a situation that we often find ourselves in, where we're kind of looking at the breaches both from the prism of what do we need to do under the applicable security laws, but also how do we treat the breach from the privacy perspective? Do we need to tell the individuals? Do we need to report to the regulator? And on top of all of these, you might also be considering compliance breaches, for instance, in healthcare or in finance industry. And also, as I mentioned, the ethics breach would be looping into it. Now, I know it's a lot to take in, so I figure it might be a good idea for us to take a look at a few examples just to, deliver it a little better and make sure that we understand where do these things sort of collide and combine. Now, the first example I want to discuss is one that I'm sure we have read on the news countless times. You have a situation where your organization has a database, and that database has unfortunately been hacked. And those hackers have been accessing the data in the database for years. I know it's not a good idea, and it makes me flinch just to say it out loud. But on its own, you can definitely tell that this is a security breach because the CIA tried confidentiality, integrity, availability. The confidentiality definitely has been broken here. So we have the security breach, all right. Now, looking at the database that the hackers have been accessing, you can tell that it contains quite a lot of personal data. Actually, it contains all the customers that you have, personal data, including their passport numbers. And those data have unfortunately also been stolen. So besides giving you a heart attack by that sheer idea, I also think that we can agree that this also, on top of the security breach, involves privacy breach. So you need to be looking at whose data this is and which jurisdictions would be impacted, just to help you determine whether you are meeting the thresholds for notifying the data breaches, the privacy elements of it, besides, those regular things like making sure that you're mitigating the breach impact, lowering the risk, and all that. And now the idea behind all of this is that you as a company need to address the breach in a certain way. And you need to make sure that the way you address it is not only compliant with your obligations under the security laws, but also those under privacy laws, which very often actually we find, especially with the GDPR, almost bordering on those ethics requirements that we can expect companies to adhere to. You have your privacy by design. You have your requirement of transparency towards individuals. So you need to make sure that your response to the breach and even your communication of the breach to the regulators and the individuals really reflects both of these elements. And finally, you also need to make sure that it also reflects your ethics, in a sense that, for instance, once you learn about it from your CPO position, it shouldn't be the first thing for you to think, how do I sell my shares before the company value drops? That's not the ethics thing to consider here. And this can actually amount to the ethics breach beyond some other types of breaches. And also the way the company communicates things, the way they provide essential tools for the affected individuals to deal with the breach, to mitigate it. That's where we can really see the ethics treatment and management of the incident shine through. I could give you a lot of other examples from real life, and we really stumble upon them day to day. It really is, I would say, on the news frequently, and I would not be exaggerating saying that. So you can definitely see it in a situation right now that we have with the Schrems too, and the situation around disclosures to the US government. And in general, I would say the dilemma for companies whether to disclose certain types of data when requested by governments. Those governments might not necessarily always clarify why they need the data. Those governments might not always be democratic governments. The fact that there would be unconscious bias on the side of businesses with respect to maybe race of the individuals or maybe their gender, all of this can also amount to certain types of ethics breaches. The fact that we are maybe surveilling our employees for whatever reason in the workplace, the scale of the surveillance might amount to privacy breaches, but also possibly ethics breaches. And the fact that the businesses might be covering up certain issues like harassment with NDAs would also amount to breaches of ethics, but also might be bordering on breaches of the whistleblower laws applicable in the EU. So as you can tell, there is this real jumble of requirements under different types of incidents. And now that's why I'm actually proposing for us to address those incidents and to respond to them in a very consolidated manner from one place and from one portal. Because essentially what you really need to be looking at is figuring out, okay, those are all the possible areas that we can expect the incidents from, like our security, compliance, privacy, ethics. And these are the things that we need to be building on: our incident playbook, our codes of ethics, and we need to have all of these different teams involved. However, you don't need all of these people for, let's say, security incident. You might just need your security teams. Likewise, if you're dealing with privacy incident, you might really not need HR unless their data is involved. So it's really good for us from that perspective to be able to loop those people in when all of them are needed, when we have those, complex overlaps of different types of incidents. But if they're not, we want to be sure that we automatically assign them only those tasks for only those incidents which are really relevant for them, and that we respond to those incidents in compliance both with the laws, privacy, security, reporting to the right individuals, to the right authorities, but also in compliance with our policies. And finally, we need to make sure that all of this is tracked and that it's available for auditing and also for lessons learned, because ultimately we want to make sure that we don't make these same mistakes over and over again. So all of this, I would argue, is way easier if you have one central platform to manage this from, and when it's actually made easier for you through automation rules, just to make it a little easier on the heavy lifting manual side of things. Now, you can probably guess that the reason why I'm mentioning it is also that we happen to have a solution like this. And it's actually quite scalable, and it is also available in multiple languages and covers a lot of these pre-built templates for different laws and standards. So please feel free to check it out if you're interested. This is just a quick overview of our offering. So as I mentioned, we do have ethics offering as such, but more importantly, we also have offering and tools for privacy breaches, security breaches, compliance breaches management, just to really give you that holistic approach that I agree you should probably need when you want to tackle all different elements of incidents in your day-to-day business. And now here are a few more resources if you're interested to learn a little bit more about the subject that we've discussed here. And yeah, I think we're kind of open for questions. I know I've been speaking quite a lot, so I'm sorry that we don't have a bit more time for it, but I was just going to check. Did we get any questions?
presentation. It was especially interesting to see how all the different breach scenarios are intertwined. I think we have time for one quick question, which I'll just drop over to you. So many controllers are still unsure on whether they have to notify their DPAs if there was a data breach, because they have difficulties assessing whether there is still a risk for the user. So what do you recommend they do?
That's a really good point, and I definitely see this happening a lot. So again, I would say that the key here is to make sure that you have a consistent threshold or consistent way that you assess those incidents against. So basically for privacy breaches under the GDPR, you need to assess what is the level of risk here. So you need to be able to apply the same scale, the same assessment to every incident to be consistent and to determine, okay, this is beyond the threshold, this is below it, so we don't have to notify. And having that consistency and being able to track that over time, having that sort of audit trail available for how you reach that decision that you don't notify perhaps, I think that's really the key in succeeding over time with the GDPR breach notification.
Thank you. And thanks again, Linda, for your presentation, for your time today. I hope you have a few more minutes or maybe half an hour or so to stay on the platform, because I guess there will be further questions afterwards. But
Absolutely.
thank you for now.
Absolutely.
See you soon.
Thank you so much. Cheers.